Imagine dedicating your life to caring for strangers, and one day discovering that one of those patients changed your destiny forever. This isn't just the story of a nurse and a wealthy elderly man. It's the story of Evelyn Carter, a woman who believed her job ended the moment a patient was discharged, until she met William Harrington. He was a wealthy man, but with a closed heart, abandoned by his own family and carrying regrets that time could not erase. She was a dedicated nurse who saw dignity where others only saw fragility. Two worlds so different that they should never have crossed paths, but they met in a hospital room, forever changing the meaning of caring for both of them. What began as simple professionalism blossomed into an unlikely connection, made of respected silences, kept promises, and secrets that would only be revealed after his death. When William passed away, he left Evelyn something no amount of money could buy. Not only the key to his mansion, but also a request impossible to ignore. Meet someone he's never met, but loved his whole life. Get ready, because this is a story of legacy, reconciliation, and second chances, a story that will touch your heart and perhaps make you ask, what would you leave behind if you knew today was your last day? And before I forget, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. And if you like this story, comment at the end. This really helps bring more exciting stories like this. The light rain left the facade of the Riverside Community Hospital in the Virginia countryside with the shine of wet glass. Evelyn Carter, 31, walked into the night shift with her hair hastily tied up and her name tag turned inside out, as she always did when the shift started chaotically. In triage, someone commented, "Room 214, transfer from Memorial. VIP patient, wealthy family, difficult temperament." Evelyn just nodded. Difficult usually meant disguised fear, and she'd seen fear of all kinds. When he opened the door to 214, he found William Harrington, 82, skin as thin as stationery and steel-grey eyes. The monitor marked irregular rhythms after a love mini-stroke. He turned his face away before she even said goodnight, as if protecting himself from yet another disappointment. "I don't need a babysitter," he grumbled, his voice raspy, like someone who'd smoked too much and talked too little in recent years. Evelyn smiled toothlessly, the smile she learned to use when someone bites before asking for water. "Good thing I'm a nurse." She adjusted the oximeter, straightened the pillow, and opened the blinds 2 fingers. From there, William could see the James River reflecting the lights of the bridge. There was an old portrait on the table, a younger man next to a woman in a blue dress and a baby in a knitted blanket. The frame had a broken latch, held together with tape. Evelyn pretended not to notice, but it registered. Years of running had taught her. Objects speak when we don't force them to. She checked his medication, explained the care plan in short sentences. Less salt, more physical therapy, no heroic stubbornness. And when she finished, listened to the first thanks his. It was dry but true, like rain that starts on a hot tile. In the hallway, her colleague warned her, "The family called just to ask about the bill, not about him." Evelyn took a deep breath. It was common. Money arrives before affection and often closes the door from the inside. Back in the room, she noticed his hand trembling, not from pain, but from the effort to maintain control. "Do you like sunsets?" he asked, opening the blinds a little further. The sky, romantic and tacky, spilled orange over the river. William kept his jaw set, but his pupils dilated. The body betrays where the mouth denies. "My wife," he began and stopped, as if the seam of memory had burst. Evelyn didn't push the conversation. Instead, she straightened the extra knitted blanket she'd brought from the utility room, one of those volunteers knit for patients who arrive with nothing. "It looks better this way, Mr. Harrington." He was surprised by her full last name, like someone hearing their own name on the radio in the middle of the night. "William will do." The nurse wrote, "William prefers to be called by his first name. Small peace treaties begin with how we call someone." Before leaving, she turned off the main light and left the reading light on, a simple gesture that made the room feel less like a hospital and more like a bedroom. The doorknob already cold in her hand, she heard his voice, almost a plea. "Will you come back next shift?" "I will, William. And I'm bringing the sunset with me in case he's late." In the early morning, as the alarms breathed their constant beeping, Evelyn noticed William awake, writing something on hotel paper, his pen trembling like someone holding an ancient bridge. He folded the note and tucked it into the broken-framed portrait, and for a second he looked at Evelyn as if entrusting someone with more than just a piece of paper. The next morning, William woke with the frown of someone who had already decided to lose the argument before it began. "The medicine makes me dizzy," he grumbled, pushing the small cup of antihypertensive medication away as if it were an undue bill. Evelyn didn't argue. She offered him water, waited for the silence to subside, and explained the plan in hallway speak. "Controlling your blood pressure will prevent another mini-stroke and protect your speech." She did. "Teach back. William, how would you explain to me why we're going to take this one now?" He repeated, a little reluctantly, but he repeated it and swallowed the pill as if signing a temporary armistice. The physiotherapist was late because of an incident, so Evelyn improvised a short routine, incentive spirometer breathing and stretches at the bedside. 3 sets of 10, and I'll stop insisting on the beet juice," she joked. He snorted, his spine stiff, but his gaze followed the arrow rising as if monitoring his own stubbornness. Between attempts, she adjusted the bed height, handed him the call button just to test, and moved the rug out of the way. Falls in the elderly are not forgiving. In the end, William complained about the noise in the hallway. Evelyn put a sound machine of white noise, app version on the nursing tablet, and the sound of metal carts became distant like a night train. At lunch, he refused the boring mashed potatoes and asked for strong coffee, forbidden in the post-TIA era. Evelyn brought decaffeinated with cinnamon and a drizzle of honey, served in a cute thermal cup from the pediatric ward, a strategy she learned from a colleague. A different cup breaks down resistance. As he drank, she made a comment that wasn't about health, but about life. "You know, the James River outside is a copper color today. You can see it from 214. He pretended not to care, but 10 minutes later he asked for the blinds to be raised another inch. Evelyn left him sitting in the chair, feet propped up, fall alarm activated, and taught him a simple exercise. Stand up and sit down 3 times, slowly, holding on to the support. A chair is a gym for those who are recovering. Mid-afternoon, an intern hurried in with papers to sign, addressing William by his last name, as if he were a bank. The old man stiffened, his hand shaking with irritation. Evelyn intercepted with firm kindness. "We'll finish later. Now it's time for your exercise." "William," the intern blushed and left apologizing, and the patient let out a rusty laugh. "You sound like my wife would," he said without looking at her, and the sentence settled in the room like pollen. Evelyn didn't ask anything, she just wrote it down. Dignity is restored through details. At the end of her shift, she reviewed his medication in his presence, checked for allergies, repositioned the picture in its broken frame, and left a notebook. "If insomnia strikes, write. I'll read it tomorrow, only if you want." William cleared his throat, looked at the notebook as if staring at a narrow bridge, and shook his head. Evelyn walked to the door, ready for the next bed, when she heard the question she hadn't expected. "Have you ever lost someone? Can't been afraid of forgetting their voice?" The monitor's beep remained steady, but the air between them changed in density. Before Evelyn could answer, the gas station phone rang urgently. 14 saturation drop. She spun on her heel, oxygen already on her mind, and realized William had his hand on his chest, trying to say more than the oxygen would allow. The alarm blared sharply, but Evelyn's pace was measured. Hurry without panic. She adjusted the oxygen mask on William's face, checked the flow and measured his saturation. The reading rose slowly, like someone climbing a hill on a hot day. "Take a deep breath, William. That's it. Count to 4 as you inhale." His hand tightened on the sheet, but his gaze sought hers, and Evelyn maintained contact like someone anchoring a boat in rough seas. Little by little, color returned to her cheeks, and the monitor stabilized. He closed his eyes for a moment, and when he opened them, he looked more emotionally than physically exhausted. "It happened when my wife passed away," he murmured. Evelyn pulled the chair closer to the bed. This wasn't the time to avoid the subject. "I'm sorry, William." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the half-open blinds. She loved watching the James River in the fall. We'd spend hours on the porch. After she left, the house was just a house, cold. The next pause was heavy. "And my children, distant. Business. Appearances. I don't understand how I became a stranger to them." Evelyn listened silently, knowing that patience is the greatest painkiller. She explained simply how she grew up in a small house in Southern Virginia, where her parents, despite having little, always offered an extra plate at the table for neighbors. "My father died young, and my mother got sick. Taking care of her was my first real internship," she said with a soft smile. William watched her as if it were their first genuine conversation in a long time. "You understand what it's like to lose someone and move on, don't you?" Evelyn simply nodded. He seemed to think for a moment, and then, with a long sigh, he pointed to the broken framed portrait. "That's my daughter Margaret, and the baby in her arms is Emily, my granddaughter. I never knew her." The confession came with a shadow in his eyes. Evelyn felt the weight of years unsaid. "Why?" she asked carefully. William looked away, feigning interest in the beeping of the monitor. "Long stories and not always pretty, but there are things I wanted to fix." The atmosphere grew tense, and Evelyn knew it wasn't time to insist. She made a mental note. "There is a granddaughter who is part of this story." As he adjusted the sheet, William said something almost inaudible. "One day, I may ask you a favor, for when I'm no longer here." She paused for a second, feeling the weight of the implication, but answered without hesitation, "If it's to help William, I promise to listen." He closed his eyes, perhaps relieved, perhaps exhausted, but the brief squeeze he gave her hand was answer enough. In the hallway, Evelyn had barely recorded the note in the chart when she heard the call over the loudspeaker, "Room 214, patient traveling for exams." As he passed through the door, he saw William looking out the window, and for the first time, he didn't just seem to be looking at the river. He seemed to be measuring the time he had left. The transport took William for a series of routine post-TIA exams. Evelyn accompanied him to the CT scan room, making sure the blanket was securely fastened around his feet. During the wait, he clutched the picture in the broken frame. He wouldn't let go, not even while the technician adjusted the stretcher. It was as if that piece of paper were a life preserver in a sea only he could see. When they returned to the room, Evelyn couldn't resist her curiosity. As she adjusted the pillows, she commented softly, "You three look happy in that picture." William stared, taking longer than usual to respond. It was the last day before everything changed. His wrinkled fingers traced the woman's face in the image. "Margaret, my daughter, and Emily, my granddaughter. I never saw her grow up." His voice broke, but he composed himself. "Margaret left after a big fight. Things I can't undo." Evelyn, accustomed to hearing confessions at 2 in the morning, knew that silence was sometimes more productive than advice. She let him decide what he wanted to say or not. William took a deep breath, as if pulling out an old thorn. "I was too harsh, just like my father. I demanded that she follow my plans, not hers. One day she simply didn't come back." Her eyes, fixed on the portrait, shone not only with moisture but with accumulated regret. "And since then, nothing?" Evelyn asked, keeping her voice low. "Nothing. No letter. No phone call. I heard from someone else that she had a daughter, and that's it." He placed the frame on the nightstand, carefully as if it were made of crystal. Evelyn felt a tightness in her chest, not just because of the story, but because of the way he carried the regret, like someone constantly paying interest on an emotional debt. Late that night, as she adjusted the monitor and recorded his vital signs, Evelyn noticed William seemed to want to say something more, but swallowed it. As she left, she allowed herself a non-technical note. There are wounds that exams do not capture. The next day, upon entering the room, Evelyn found William awake before dawn, sitting at the table with pen and paper. He was writing slowly, as if recording memories in time itself. When he noticed her presence, he simply said, "I'm preparing something for when I'm no longer here." That morning the room was silent, except for the soft sound of pen scratching on paper. William, still in his hospital pajamas, hunched over the makeshift desk, his handwriting shaky but firm. Evelyn entered discreetly, bringing the decaf coffee he had accepted for the past few days. He looked at the cup and, for the first time, thanked her without the usual mechanical formality. "I'm leaving everything in order," he said, folding the sheet of paper and placing it in a cream-colored envelope, already handwritten with his name, Evelyn Carter. She was surprised but didn't ask. She knew that asking too early could close doors. Instead, she asked how he'd slept. "Better. I think I dreamed about my wife and the balcony." His tone was almost serene, until suddenly he fixed her with his gaze. "Promise me one thing. If my health worsens, don't send me to a nursing home." Evelyn felt the weight of the sentence. It was more than a doctor's request. It was a plea for dignity. "William, I promise to take care of you here in the hospital or at home, whatever it takes, but we need to work together to prevent that from happening." He took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "It's just, I've seen people go there and never return to their former selves. I don't want to end my days surrounded by strangers, waiting for the last visit that never comes." The raw honesty touched Evelyn personally. It reminded her of her own mother, dreading spending her final days away from a familiar face. They sealed the deal with a simple handshake. There were no speeches, no formalities, just a silent pact between two people who knew trust is a rare commodity. Evelyn, before leaving to answer another call, adjusted the blanket around his shoulders and left the blinds slightly open so she could watch the early morning light over the James River. Hours later, while reviewing charts at the nurses' station, Evelyn heard an alarm coming from room 214. She rushed in and found William gasping for breath, clutching his chest, the beginning of a crisis that would test her promise much sooner than she imagined. The heart monitor beeped rapidly as William struggled to breathe. Evelyn entered with the emergency cart already in motion, connecting the oxygen with the agility of someone who knows that seconds count more than any written protocol. "William, stay with me. Breathe with me," she said, calibrating the O2 flow and preparing the IV line for medication. His face, pale and damp with sweat, revealed more fear than pain, and yet there was a kind of resignation, as if he had already prepared himself for this moment. The support team entered, but Evelyn remained in command. She adjusted the headboard position, administered the bronchodilator, and massaged his shoulder, synchronizing his breathing so he matched the rhythm. Gradually, the tracing on the monitor slowed, and his chest stopped rising and falling in despair. "You saved my life again," he whispered, and she heard his voice crack, not from physical exertion, but from something deeper. As the team dispersed and the room fell silent, William stared at the ceiling. "I don't know why you care so much. Isn't it your job to go above and beyond?" Evelyn sat in the chair beside the bed, keeping her tone calm. "Because everyone deserves someone who cares, and because I promised I'd take care of you." He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a few seconds, before turning his face toward the window. "Then I need to finish something before it's too late." That early morning, while the hospital slept in its routine of low lights and discreet footsteps, Evelyn stopped by room 214 to check vital signs and found William back at the table, writing. He didn't notice her immediately, so focused was he on every word. On the table were several envelopes with names she didn't recognize, all sealed. "These are stories, Evelyn. Parts of me for people who might not even want to hear them, but need them." Before she left, he called her name. "When I'm not here, you'll know what to do with them." Evelyn simply nodded, keeping the weight of the trust she was being placed upon herself. The next morning, while helping William with breakfast, Evelyn heard a strange sound in the hallway. Firm, decisive footsteps, followed by a quick knock on the door. Opening it, she found a well-dressed man with features similar to William's, but with cold eyes. "I'm Mark Harrington, his son." Mark entered the room with an air of authority and haste. Evelyn, accustomed to closed faces, realized he wasn't just serious, he was calculated. "Dad," he said without a trace of affection in his voice, as if he were fulfilling a scheduled appointment. William glanced at him without standing and replied curtly, "Did you come to check on me, or check on the inventory?" The silence that followed was so sharp it was felt in the air. Evelyn remained in the background, adjusting the dining table to avoid intruding, but Mark couldn't help himself. "I hear you've been receiving frequent visitors, and that you've been writing a lot." His gaze fell quickly on the stack of envelopes on the table. William crossed his arms. "My affairs are none of your business." His son gave a short, humorless laugh. "Everything is my business, especially when it involves family property." As soon as Mark left, after a monologue about business and inheritance, William let out a weary sigh. Evelyn came over to check his blood pressure, and, as if trying to lift a weight from his chest, he said, "These letters aren't for him. They're for people time has taken from me." He lightly touched the envelope with her name on it. "And for you too." Evelyn noticed a deliberate arrangement, separate piles, each with a handwritten name, some with red ribbons. "Why tell me this?" she asked, keeping her tone low. "Because you're the only one here who actually listens. One day you might be the one who needs to deliver them." As he put the envelopes away in the drawer, William made an unexpected request. "If anything happens to me, don't let Mark touch these letters." His tone was serious, almost a command. Evelyn felt the weight of the promise she had just silently accepted. That late afternoon, while writing in the chart, Evelyn saw through her bedroom window a silhouette standing in the parking lot, looking up toward 214. The setting sun's light illuminated the face of an unknown woman, who quickly turned and walked away. William, from his bed, watched the scene with a distant gaze. 2 days later, Mark returned, this time unannounced and with a more hostile tone. He found Evelyn in the hallway and bluntly said, "How long do you intend to stay with my father? A private nurse isn't a relative." Evelyn took a deep breath, maintaining her professional demeanor. "My job is to take care of him and make sure he follows his medical plan, that's all." Mark smirked, but his eyes held suspicion. "I hope that's all." Entering the room, Mark adopted an almost theatrical tone. "Dad, we need to talk about the house, the bills, and the will." William, still pale from the exertion of his morning physical therapy, leaned back in bed. "Mark, I told you, I don't want to talk about paperwork right now." His son insisted, raising his voice. "If you don't decide, you'll end up letting strangers decide for you." Evelyn, standing nearby, realized the word strangers was heavily implied. The conversation degenerated into veiled accusations and tense silences. In the end, William simply said, "Mark, if you've come to measure my days in numbers, the door is over there." His son, before leaving, threw another barb. "Don't forget that certain people can take advantage of your vulnerability." Evelyn felt the impact of the insinuation, but remained silent, respecting William's space. After the door closed, he closed his eyes for a few seconds, as if needing to filter the weight of that exchange. "He's always been like that, Evelyn. The kind of man who mistakes affection for transaction." She simply replied, "You don't have to let that define you." William opened his eyes and stared at the envelope with her name on it. "That's why I need to change a few things." The next day, a lawyer arrived at the hospital with a black briefcase. Evelyn watched William sign documents and exchange a few words. When the lawyer left, he simply said, "Now, at least, I know that part of my story will end up in the right hands." December arrived, adorning the city with lights and festive displays, but the atmosphere at the hospital was different. Cold hallways, fewer visitors, and patients feeling the weight of absence. Evelyn knew William wouldn't have any family around that Christmas. The day before, she brought a small wreath made by volunteers and discreetly hung it on his bedroom wall. When he noticed, he arched an eyebrow. "You know I don't believe in that stuff," she smiled. "It's not about believing, William, it's about remembering that even here it's still Christmas." Late in the afternoon, Evelyn entered with a makeshift tray. Sliced turkey, mashed potatoes, sautéed vegetables, and a decaf coffee with cinnamon. On the tray sat a small package wrapped in plain paper. William looked at it, intrigued. "And this?" she replied. "A gift. Open it." Inside was a navy blue wool scarf. "I made it on my time off. I thought it would suit you." He ran his fingers over the fabric, and for a moment the hardness in his face softened. "I have something for you too," he said, opening the nightstand drawer. He took out a small velvet case. Inside was an antique heart-shaped pendant necklace. "It belonged to my wife. I want you to have it. It's not a gift. It's a token of trust." Evelyn hesitated. "I don't know if I should accept it," he insisted. "Then take it as a keepsake, not as a debt." That night they had dinner together, talking about childhood stories, favorite songs, and even the frost-covered James River. His laughter was rare, but it was there, shy and genuine. At the end, he said something Evelyn would remember forever. "You managed to bring warmth to a winter I thought would be the last and coldest of my life." 2 days later, against medical advice, William asked to go home. "I want to spend my days looking at the river from the balcony, not the ceiling of a hospital." Evelyn knew this decision would change everything, and that it might be her last challenge as his nurse. It took a delicate negotiation with the medical team, but Evelyn was able to get William home, with nursing care and regular doctor visits. The Harrington mansion sat high on a hill with large windows and direct views of the James River. Upon entering, Evelyn noticed the space was immense, but it carried a heavy, almost solid silence. No recent photos, just old portraits and impeccably polished furniture, as if no one had lived there for years. In the early days, Evelyn established a simple routine: light physical therapy in the morning, balanced meals at lunch, and long conversations in the afternoon, always with the sunset as the backdrop. William seemed to revive little by little, but his physical frailty was evident. His movements were slower, his breathing shallower. He would spend hours on the porch, a blue scarf around his neck, gazing at the river. "Here, I feel at peace," he once commented. The tone of conversation changed, less about business or regrets, more about fond memories. Fishing trips with his father, trips with his wife, the smell of apple pie baking in the oven. Evelyn mentally jotted down every detail, feeling it was a kind of oral testament. At night, she would find him writing new letters, always kept in the locked office drawer. As the weeks passed, William's body gave out. One morning, Evelyn found him weaker than usual, his gaze lost on the horizon. "I don't know how much time I have, but I know it's almost here," he said without fear, but with a calm that only those who have made peace with their past can achieve. On an early spring morning, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the kitchen. Evelyn carried the cup upstairs, but upon entering the bedroom she found William motionless, his blue scarf still around his neck, an envelope addressed to her on his chest. The funeral was low-key, as William would have preferred, without ostentation and with few attendees. Evelyn stood in the back, clutching the envelope he had left on her chest. The words "for Evelyn Carter" were handwritten in the same shaky handwriting she had seen so many times. 2 days later, she received a call from the law firm Harrington and Myers, requesting her presence for the reading of the will. In the dark, wood-paneled room, Evelyn sat next to 2 lawyers and, to her surprise, Mark. Her son maintained an impassive expression, but the slight tightening of his lips betrayed tension. The lead lawyer began, "By express arrangement of William Harrington," and then listed assets, donations to charities, and finally announced, "The principal residence, all personal property therein, and a significant amount in trust will be bequeathed to Evelyn Carter." The air in the room seemed to change density. Mark leaned forward. "Is this a joke?" he snapped. The lawyer maintained his composure. "No, Mr. Harrington, it's registered and valid." Evelyn felt a mixture of shock and heaviness. This wasn't just a house, it was a piece of William's history. After reading it, the lawyer handed her the envelope she already had. Inside she found not just a letter, but a bundle of smaller letters, each with a name written on it. The main letter read, "Evelyn, this house is yours now, but the real gift is in the letters. There are stories and a request in them. Take care of someone I've never met, but always loved. Hook." At the bottom of the pile was a letter addressed to Emily, accompanied by a worn-cover diary and an old photo album. Evelyn understood in that instant what William's mission was, and that there would be no peace until it was accomplished. That night, sitting in the mansion's old library, Evelyn spread out the diary, the album, and the letter addressed to Emily on the table. The diary contained decades-old entries describing moments with William's daughter, Margaret, and scattered clues about her whereabouts after the family feud. There were mentions of a coastal town in North Carolina, letters never sent, and records of missed phone calls. The letter to Emily was short but packed with emotional weight. "Dear Emily, you may not know me, but I'm your grandfather. If this letter reached you, it's because I'm no longer here. I never got to see you grow up, but I thought about you every day. I hope you'll accept this album as proof that you've always been in my heart. Take care and be happy." Evelyn felt a lump in her throat as she imagined her granddaughter reading those words for the first time. Determined to fulfill William's last request, she started by searching the internet. Birth records, old phone books, online community groups. She found mentions of an Emily Cooper who matched her approximate age, but the trail was incomplete. She decided she would need to travel to North Carolina in person to follow the leads. Before leaving, Evelyn carefully locked the drawer containing the letters and informed the lawyer of her trip. She didn't want to risk Mark interfering. As she closed the mansion door, she looked out onto the balcony overlooking the river and said softly, "I'll find her, William. I promise." The first stop would be a small registry office in Wilmington, where Evelyn believed she might find an adoption or guardianship record that would link Emily to her current whereabouts. What she didn't realize was that this search would reveal more than an address. It would reveal a story that would change the course of her own life. Wilmington greeted her with overcast skies and the smell of sea air. Evelyn parked near the old registry office, a red brick building that seemed frozen in time. Inside, after showing documents and explaining that he was fulfilling a posthumous request, he was granted access to old records. Among yellowed pages and nearly illegible writing, he found what he was looking for: a provisional guardianship document for a girl named Emily Margaret Cooper, issued when she was just 2 years old. The associated address, however, was more than 20 years old. With the clue in hand, Evelyn headed to the aforementioned neighborhood. It was a simple area, with pastel-colored wooden houses, low fences, and children playing in the street. An elderly neighbor, upon hearing the name, frowned and said, "Emily? I remember. She left here when she turned 18. She worked everywhere to support herself." There were no further details, only the memory that she talked a lot about working in coffee. Following this thread, Evelyn visited local coffee shops, discreetly inquiring. At one, a young attendant pointed to a picture of former employees hanging on the wall. There was Emily, a few years younger, with a shy smile and eyes reminiscent of William's. The manager informed her that she had moved to Richmond, Virginia, where she worked as a barista at a downtown cafe. Evelyn's heart beat faster. Richmond was just a few hours' drive away, and it represented the penultimate step before completing the mission. Before leaving, she thanked the manager and spent a few minutes alone in the car, looking at the address she'd written down. She thought about William, and how she would feel if she could witness that reunion. Arriving in Richmond the next day, Evelyn walked into the recommended cafe. Amid the sound of the espresso machine and the intense aroma of freshly ground beans, she spotted behind the counter a young woman who could easily be William's granddaughter. But how to start a conversation that had been silent for decades? The cafe was bustling with customers coming and going, and Evelyn felt the weight of each second before approaching the counter. The young woman behind the espresso machine had light brown hair pulled back in a makeshift bun, and her eyes so familiar, with the same shade of grey Evelyn had seen in William. Her name tag read Emily C. When the line thinned, Evelyn took a deep breath and approached. "Are you Emily Margaret Cooper?" she asked quietly. The young woman looked surprised and cautiously replied, "Yes. Have we met?" Evelyn opened her purse and removed the letter and the cloth-wrapped album. "Not exactly, but I knew someone who loved you all her life." She placed the package on the counter. "Your grandfather, William Harrington." Emily's eyes widened. "My grandfather." She picked up the album with trembling hands and began to leaf through it. The old photos showed a young William, a smiling Margaret, and pictures of a baby, herself. She opened the letter carefully. As she read, her eyes filled with silent tears. When she finished, she pressed the envelope to her chest and said, "I thought he didn't care, that he never wanted to know me." Evelyn shook her head. "He cared more than you know. He asked me to find you and give you this." The two sat at a table in the corner. Emily talked about her unstable childhood, her jobs to support herself, and how she always wanted answers about her family. Evelyn talked about William, his final months, and how he still kept the portrait of Margaret and her as a baby. Between sips of coffee, the weight of the unknown began to transform into a connecting thread. At the end of the conversation, Emily hesitated before asking, "Can I see his house?" Evelyn realized that this request wasn't just about a property, but about seeing a piece of herself. 2 days later, Evelyn pulled into the Harrington Mansion driveway, with Emily in the passenger seat. The iron gate slowly opened, revealing the expansive lawn and the porch overlooking the James River. Emily got out of the car silently, taking in every detail, as if trying to memorize the scene forever. "Did he see the river every day?" she asked. Evelyn smiled. Yes, it was his favorite place. Inside, the air carried the gentle scent of old wood and stored books. Evelyn led the young woman to the library, where William's diary still rested on the shelf, next to the letters Emily now knew existed. "This is all part of your story," Evelyn said, handing her the key to the drawer containing her grandfather's most intimate memoirs. Emily opened it carefully, touching each envelope as if it were a reliquary. They sat on the porch, the same spot where William had spent so many afternoons, and gazed at the river. "You know, I think he would have liked us here together," Emily commented. Evelyn nodded. "He wanted you to have a real home, and I think we can both take care of that together." The gleam in Emily's eyes was a mixture of gratitude and relief. Over time, the mansion went from being a silent space to a home filled with voices, the smell of coffee and impromptu dinners. Evelyn continued her work as a nurse, but now she had someone to share the house and her life with. Emily, for her part, found more than a roof over her head. She found roots and the sense of belonging she'd always sought. And so, William's final request was granted. His legacy lay not only in his physical inheritance, but in the bridge he built between two lives that might never have met without his intervention. There, on the banks of the James River, Evelyn and Emily vowed that their home would remain a haven of love, memory, and new beginnings, and so William Harrington's dying wish was fulfilled. Evelyn found Emily, delivered her keepsakes, and together they transformed a quiet house into a living home, filled with stories, laughter, and new beginnings. This story isn't just about material inheritance. It's about how small gestures of care can span decades, heal old wounds, and create bonds that blood alone can't build. William left more than a mansion. He left a legacy of reconciliation and love. Evelyn, by accepting the mission, reminds us that true value lies in what we do for others, even when there is nothing left to gain. What about you? Have you thought about what mark you'll leave on the hearts of the people you meet? Perhaps the greatest gift we can give is steamy attention and compassion. Now it's up to you. Subscribe to the channel so as not to miss real and exciting stories like this one. Leave your like if this narrative touched your heart. Comment below what moved you the most, or if you have ever experienced something similar. Share this video with someone you think needs to hear this message today. Let's spread stories that inspire, unite, and renew faith in humanity.